Today, we're diving into the story of a military commander from the 15th century, Jan Žižka. And his battlefield record is, well, it's frankly unbelievable. He's a figure that seems like he stepped right out of a myth, but oh, he was very, very real. Okay, so let me ask you something. Have you ever heard of a general who never lost a single battle? Not one. Now, what if I told you he kept that perfect record even after he went completely blind? That, my friends, is Jan Žižka. You know you've made an impact when even your enemies talk about you like you're some kind of force of nature. This quote here, it's from the Crusaders who fought against him, and it just shows you how unstoppable he seemed. They literally couldn't beat him, so they figured only an act of God could take him off the board. So how on earth does someone build that kind of reputation? Well, to really get the legend, we've got to go back to the beginning. Before he was a general, before the revolution, Žižka's life was, you could say, defined by struggle. He started out as a minor noble, more title than cash. These financial problems seem to have pushed him right to the edge of society. And for a while, he was officially listed as a bandit, an outlaw. But then his life takes this wild turn. He gets pardoned by the king himself and goes on to fight as a mercenary in one of the biggest battles in medieval Europe. So yeah, this was not the resume of a typical commander. All of that gritty, hands-on experience in warfare was about to find its true cause. A massive religious and national conflict was about to just explode, and it would transform this hardened fighter into a revolutionary leader. It all started when Jan Hus, a beloved Czech religious reformer, was executed. This just lit a fire across the land. His followers, the Hussites, rose up, and the whole thing really blew up with the First Defenestration of Prague. And yes, that is a real thing, where protesters threw city officials out of a town hall window. The Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, their response was to call a crusade, sending armies of Europe's best knights to just crush this rebellion. So here's the big question. How did this rebel army, an army made up of peasants and farmers, have any hope at all against the full might of the Crusaders? Well, the answer was Jan Žižka and his absolute genius for unconventional warfare. Žižka's signature move was the Wagenburg, or wagon fort. Now, these weren't just your average supply carts. No way. He turned them into armored mobile fortresses, and he equipped them with early cannons and handgunners. It was a concept that was basically 500 years ahead of its time. Think of it like a medieval tank. And the way he used them was brilliant. It was this perfect 1-2 punch. So first, the defensive phase. The wagons locked together into a circle, this wall of wood and steel. From behind that cover, his artillery would provoke the super confident, heavily armored knights into a charge. As they got bogged down trying to break through, they were just hammered by gunfire. Then, once the attack was broken and their spirit was shattered, phase 2 kicks in, the counterattack. Infantry with pikes and flails would pour out of the fort and just annihilate the confused, terrified enemy. I mean, look at this. These improvised mobile fortresses totally neutralized the Crusaders' main weapon, the devastating charge of their heavy cavalry. It's pretty simple, really. A knight on a giant warhorse is basically useless against a fortified wall. This was a true clash of worlds. On one side, you've got the whole feudal system, professional knights decked out in plate armor, fighting by the book. And on the other, you have Žižka's army of everyday people, armed with modified farm tools and these revolutionary new ideas. It was the ultimate underdog story. And Žižka's innovation didn't stop with the wagon forts. He was a pioneer in using gunpowder, introducing some of the very first pistols and mobile artillery to the battlefield. Fun fact, the Czech words for them, pištala and houfnice, are where we get our modern words pistol and howitzer. He even turned simple farming flails into absolutely devastating weapons against armored knights. He was a master of using whatever he had to get the job done. These tactics basically made Žižka's reputation as an invincible commander. But he was about to face the single greatest challenge of his life. Early on in the wars, during a siege, Žižka was winded and lost an eye. From that point on, he was known as One-Eyed Žižka. But get this. Losing half his sight did absolutely nothing to slow him down. His tactical mind was as sharp as ever. And then, in 1421, the unthinkable happened. An arrow wound at another siege, and it took the sight from his one good eye. The most successful general in Europe was now completely blind. And yet, his winning streak just kept going. Just let that sink in for a minute. He kept leading his armies from the front, relying on his lieutenants to describe the battlefield so he could picture it in his mind. In 1422, a year after being blinded, he faced a crusader army at the Battle of Kutna-Hora. Even though he was surrounded, he broke through their lines and crushed an army that lost 12,000 men. He did it by pulling off what many historians call the first mobile artillery maneuver in history, all without being able to see a thing. So after all those years, Žižka was never ever beaten in battle. He finally died from an illness while on campaign in 1424, and it's the way he died and what came next that truly sealed his legend. The bond he had with his soldiers, it was incredible. This wasn't just an army, it was a family forged in the fires of rebellion. When Žižka died, his soldiers didn't call themselves leaderless. They called themselves the orphans because they truly felt like they had lost their father. And that legend reaches its peak with his famous dying wish. The story goes that he asked his followers to flay his body and stretch his skin over a war drum. That way, the sound of it could still lead them into battle, striking fear into their enemies even after he was gone. And that brings us right back to where we started, looking at this massive statue in Prague. It doesn't just honor a military genius. It honors a symbol of Czech resilience, a man who, against every possible odd, armed with little more than his conviction and his creativity, simply could not be defeated. Žižka's story really leaves us with a fascinating question, doesn't it? He proved that when the old rules just don't work anymore, and your very survival is on the line, that's when real innovation is born. It just makes you wonder, does genius need a little desperation to truly flourish?